Good morning, everybody. It is Bret Buike here with Buckeye Dealership Consulting, and also I have Jim Rhodes with the Octane Group. And for the Wisdom Wednesday this month, we're going to address a topic that comes up all the time in conversation, and I'm sure it's a topic we can talk about for a significant period of time, and that is collections. So what Jim and I are going to attempt to do today is or over the next couple of Wednesdays, is kind of hammer down each Wednesday into kind of a more specific topic, give you guys 10 to 15 minutes of, Jim's expertise on how we can, approaches to collections, different ways to look at it, and some best practices. So Jim, I appreciate your time, and, welcome to the group here.
Sure, happy to be here, happy to contribute.
So obviously, Amanda asked about the, collections and asked us to kind of participate here. And I know you do a significant amount of, consulting and stuff around the country. And one of the things that I see that you post every once in a while is your, those surveys. So when it comes to collections, what types of surveys have you done, and what were the results of those surveys around collections?
Sure. So we recently started into that. We're probably about halfway through the number of surveys we want to do. So there's still some work to be done. But the purpose of the survey was really to quiz dealer principals on kind of what their challenges were as it related to collections. So, among the questions were things like, if you had to replace a collector tomorrow, what training method would you be using? How would you go about training a new person? Or, we asked them, of the procedures that you currently live by, policies or procedures that you live by in your collection department, what percentage of those are in writing? Among the other things we asked were things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most strict, or iron fist kind of approach, and 1 being super lenient, where would you rank yourself in terms of, your level of being strict in collections? And the answers just, varied, as you might expect. Like we see in our travels, of course, that, people are all over the place in terms of their business approach. And look, there's lots of different ways to be successful. I always say there's no one way to do this. There's lots of different business models and different approaches. But I can generally say in collections, you fall into almost 2 camps. It's like you either are really strict and you're hard on people and you don't, give them any kind of flexibility at all, or you're lenient and cooperative. And so that's kind of what we're trying to dial in and figure out, what really works. And the reality is either can work. My suggestion really would typically be to people that, look, both can produce payments on Friday. It's just, I think, to have sustained success, we really encourage our clients to look at a bend without breaking approach. You gotta bend a little bit and be flexible with people. And then the challenge becomes in training collectors is how to know, when it's time to stop bending because the customer's taking advantage, right? And so we got to be able to bring that to an end. But I definitely condone, an approach that's cooperative and flexible, with the objective being to have the customer be successful and get all the way to the end of the contract. Like we're looking for payments, not cars. And so we're just trying to be flexible and work through things.
Yeah, we definitely don't want the cars back.
Yeah, exactly.
And, one of the, to kind of build on that, I think was, it kind of goes to, strict or firm. But the other part of that for me always was, who gets to make the decisions, right? And as you travel and as I'm traveling around, you've got, dealerships where, it's the owner and some family and they're intimately involved in every account.
Sure.
And then you have one where you've got, actual collectors in the background. And, is it, you can have strict and you can have lenient, but I also felt like, where do you stand with the person who's actually doing the collecting, working with people, it's case by case, and empowering the collector to make decisions rather than just sticking to either super rigid or super, lenient guidelines. Like you don't want the collector just letting everybody go, but you also don't want, everybody's GPS getting pinged, every single time they're late for a payment. So
that's a good point.
How do you see that play out?
Yeah, so on that one, we definitely, we like to obviously see employees be empowered. That's part of how we grow as a company, is giving people the necessary authority. And they need to earn that, obviously, when they prove themselves to represent the kind of the culture or the philosophy of the company, then, you know, I've always been a believer in virtually any position that we fill in any business, and buy here, pay here is no exception. It's like we hire people that are bright enough that we can kind of give them the bumpers, you know, give them the rule book and kind of understand what their boundaries are, and we can expand those boundaries over time. But I like to see collectors have, you know, the authority to work with people and do things as long as it's within that framework of what we're trying to do. Then I definitely emphasize cooperation, flexibility, which kind of takes us, you know, we'll get there, but it's like this whole thing about delinquency. Do you compensate based on delinquency? And there's some problems with that, which we can talk about. But I just think when I think about collectors having the authority to do what they need to do, then it takes me to this idea that one of the things I started doing years ago is I quit doing collections training without the dealer principal present. So it kind of goes to what you're talking about. It's like, you know, if there's no, because we don't like band-aids. I mean, you could bring somebody to me and we could teach them some collection techniques, but a lot of what we teach, frankly, is not going to stick without the dealer principal participating, buying into it, endorsing it, and then holding people accountable to these new practices and new habits. Because I always say in collections, what we teach is not hard to learn, but it's not easy to do day after day. And so people will fall right back into their old practices if there's not somebody there to hold them accountable. So you talk about the, you know, the dealer principal really needs to buy into whatever that approach is going to be. And then you just have to have consistency throughout.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point. I mean, in buy here, pay here, we're essentially, you know, finance companies masquerading as car dealers, right? You know, so
Right. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, you have those organizations where they can get too focused on the sales and not enough on the collections, you know, portion of it. And, you know, making sure that your collectors not only know how to do their job, but, you know, why what they're doing is important. And
Sure.
if you're a delinquency based person, great, but what's good delinquency, what's bad delinquency? If you're somebody that's on recency or cash collected, or whatever it is that is going to be your method, how you're going to run your dealership,
Right.
it's not just enough for them to know the A's and B's of collecting and what buttons to click, but they really have to understand what they're trying to accomplish and why it's important that we collect X number of dollars. And, you know, what happens to a person, you know, like things that we take for granted that you and I know. The difference between a person who's 2 weeks late and a person who's 30 days late, the likelihood of us getting that person back.
Right.
And like, if they understood those things, then they push harder at the right times, which takes me right into my next question is, you know, what is the, you know, the Jim Rhodes or the Octane Group's overall philosophy on collecting when it relates to maybe what should the dealers actually be paying attention to? And when I ask this, I always think of two things: is maybe it's the same, maybe it's different, but your self-funded guy versus your guy who has debt, right? They're both running a dealership. They're both basically doing the same thing, but the collection practices may be dictated on covenants that they have to meet.
That's right.
So what's the overall framework of, if you go into a dealership, this is what I think you guys should be paying attention to,
Right.
you know, as a, you know, high level?
Sure. So what I teach is always the same, regardless of the covenants, right? So in other words, I get that we sometimes have covenants to work within. So I would just say, look, if your lender is forcing you to take a different action than what we might recommend, have your lender call me. Maybe we can adjust the covenants, because what I don't like to see is our collection department applying too much pressure to the customer. We've got a customer who's, you know, they're typically kind of skinny on income, right? They got a lot of pressure in their lives and a lot of stresses. And so, you know, I don't like to see us put too much pressure on them, because they give up too quickly if we apply too much pressure. And so I like to see us be flexible and cooperative. And so I think the covenants really ought to reflect that. I mean, that's the short answer for me, is that we need to be able to be cooperative, and we need to de-emphasize delinquency. And I get it. At some point, we got to make a contract ineligible, you know, on a line of credit. But I'm just saying that the covenants really ought to give the dealer and the collection department the latitude to do what we think is essential, and that's working with people and being cooperative. You know, I don't look at the number of days past due as much as I look at, you know, do we have a written understanding? Is the customer following through on the written understanding? And so you can start to look at things like recency. But for me, recency kind of is one thing to look at. For me, when I'm looking at collections performance, there's about 7 different things we like to look at, and we kind of compare all of them. There's no one number that tells us the whole story. And so, some of those things are better for short term. Others give a better long range picture of how we're doing. And so we just kind of like to look at all those indicators and see kind of how we're doing. But I just think we need to be prepared to be flexible with customers who earn it. I mean, that's a big thing that we need to really, emphasize is I'm just not giving every customer a pass and giving every customer, time just because they ask for it. They're going to have to, jump through the necessary hoops, so to speak, and earn through good faith and through documentation some relief. But when they earn that, I want to be able to grant that to them without suffering on my line of credit. Is really where I'm coming from.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for us, it was always like a timeline, right? Like it wasn't about whether or not somebody was delinquent. It was, when are they going delinquent? Is this like first, second, third payment? Like that's a re-education, conversation. Sure. Or we had better have a real good reason. How you handle somebody at 6 months, how you handle somebody at 2 years is going to be completely different. But, you can't let either of them not have a good reason. We used to just, it was always about, overly communicating, very respectfully asking for proof. Sure. Hey, my account got hit twice by this, or, I missed a couple of days because I was sick. Great, send me your last paycheck stub and let's work it out. And, if you make your next 6 payments in a row on time, we'll go ahead and, we'll consider you current. But, always, trying to communicate with them. I mean, the worst thing I think you can do is be too hard on them, because then they will shut down.
That's right.
Because they never call us when there's bad news, right? They call us when something's broken, and they call us when things are okay. But if they get in an accident, if they lose their insurance, if something bad happens, I tell people all the time, I said, our collectors, I said, what would happen if I took away 20% of your income? And they're like, oh, Bret, that would be terrible. I said, well, guess what? That's what happens every single time one of our customers' kids get sick and they miss 1 day of work.
Yeah.
Calm down, right?
Like,
if it would affect you, quit treating them like they're terrible, right? Like, we're in the stuff happens business, and we have to learn to deal with that stuff. Otherwise, this isn't a good thing for you.
That's good. Yeah, I like that approach.
Yeah, and so that brings me to my next question, which is, finding good people nowadays is harder than ever. And typically when you hire someone in collections, I don't want to stereotype, but they have like a collector's mentality, right? Especially if they've come from a different industry, where it is very, how much cash did you collect? How many people did you collect from? Like a medical collector in a buy here, pay here environment, that's a hard transition.
Yeah, it is.
So what do you recommend for, what are good places to hire what does a good collector look like, right? Yeah. Maybe you're like, hey, I can't keep collecting on my own. I got to go hire somebody.
Sure.
Or I've grown and now I need to bring another person in. Where do you find a good collector? What do they look like? And go with that.
Yeah. So my answer on that was kind of, it's always hard to describe the personality part of it. Like, to me, you want organizational skills, right? Because people got to be able to be good with notation and following through. And I think as much as anything, it's about being organized. And then from a personality standpoint, I'd definitely be looking for people who are friendly on the phone. Because we've been in these collection departments where it's like a war room, and people have been there long enough, and these seasoned collectors can be really harsh and unfriendly. And it's just not the environment that I'd be trying to create. I think, some of the people in the group, I think it was maybe Jack Carter, and I've not met Jack yet, but I appreciate what he had to say in the conversation just yesterday. Was like, proactivity is a big deal. So we emphasize that. One thing to talk about before you think about a profile of a collector is, it really kind of depends on what I call the third P. And what I mean by that is, everybody talks about P and P being policies and procedures, but I think the third P is philosophy. So, it's how collectors going to operate under your tutelage or whatever. It's going to have a lot to do with what your philosophy is, and as I said, there's lots of different approaches out there that people are using. But if you adopt the philosophy that we recommend, which is flexibility and working with people, then what we really want to have people who are personable, and kind of can be an advocate for the customer. It's more of an advocacy approach, you know, is kind of what we recommend. And that just means, kind of going back to what Jack had said, is like proactivity is so important. And it's like, you know, the longer that we let a customer run past due, the more afraid the customer becomes. You know, they know that they're 7 days, 10 days late. The longer they get past due, the more nervous they get, the more inclined they are to hide, which means the earlier we can catch them and talk to them, the friendlier the dialogue is going to be, the more helpful we can be in that situation, solve a problem before it becomes a bigger problem. So I don't know if that helps answer your question about like the profile of the person. To me, is first and foremost is just organized and friendly. The rest of them, we can teach them about everything else that they need to know. And then then it's really about keeping that person. Once you get them on board, you know, my approach to keeping them is you got to have the right pay plan. If you're compensating them in the wrong place, then they can get frustrated and burn out pretty quickly. Because if you make that on delinquency, as you said, that's the nature of the work that we're in. If we're going to be flexible with people and want them to make it to the end of the contract, we're going to have, you know, kind of spikes and peaks and valleys in our delinquency. So we got to kind of be prepared to live with that and not take it personal. You know, that's another big thing is people not taking it personal. One of the things that we teach and one of the things that we share with our clients is what I worked it up years ago, and I call it an action and reaction table. It's like, it's never personal. It's like when the customer does this, we do this. It's like the customer does X, we do Y. It's not personal. It's just the nature of the way it works. This is what happens when this happens. And so it's kind of a way to basically just say, it's not personal. We just have to do what we have to do. We do the job. And then the other big thing that comes to mind on that subject, and I hope I'm answering your question, but I think we have to basically bring in this attitude. And I think I've got articles from years ago on this subject where I think we think about somebody messed up. Like, and I always ask our collectors, and you know, it came up in the conversations in this Facebook chat yesterday, and I think it's spot on. It's like one of the other questions we ask in our collection survey is, you know, do we believe as dealers that how we buy cars and how we price cars and how we do our underwriting and closing, do we believe that that affects collections? And to a person, they all said yes. You know, all the dealers that we surveyed so far said yes. How we buy cars and how we price them, all those things tie to collections. So, you know, I think that's an important thing. Too many times people think about collections and this, you know, the job of the collector.
Hey, how's it going? Sorry about that.
You want to take a pause?
No, it's just it's our electrician fixing some stuff.
There you go.
We're good.
Got to take care of business.
But yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think that, you know, culture and philosophy in your collections department, making sure that, you know, at the point of sale, the expectation is being properly explained to the customer in a friendly way. Sure. And then the dealer principal has properly explained his expectations to the collectors, and that it's not all just, you know, fire and brimstone. Right. You know, the days of being in the, you know, FU pay me, buy here, pay here world, they're gone. Right. You know, you can't just pick the cars up, wash them, and resell them anymore. Like, there's no benefit to getting that car back, right? We make our living off of payments, we make our living off of interest, and keeping the people in the cars. And collectors sometimes can forget that, yes, you're making phone calls every day, most likely. But it's really only probably, hopefully, less than 10% of the people we sold cars to. They're not all bad. Right. Yeah. And those people are going to change. Yeah. You know, from time to time. So I think that you have to be reactive. I think that, you know, it's the difference between if your customer is down to their last $200 and they have to choose between paying Capital One or, you know, in my situation, you know, CNAC, that's a hard choice. But if you can educate your customer and have that firm but fair relationship, so that now the decision becomes, am I going to pay Capital One or am I going to pay Kathy over at Byrider? That's a completely different, and that's how our customers work, right? Like, who shows me respect? Who do I want to pay? I'm going to pay somebody. And we have to do everything we can to make sure it's us. So,
yeah, that's great. I like that approach. And I think the other thing I would share is, obviously, when a dealership grows and a portfolio grows, there could come an opportunity to hire both. You might need both. But I ask my clients to really think about a couple things for them to really understand. Like I work a lot with startups, people are just getting in the business, and we help them launch into buy here, pay here. And so if they've not had any experience with the business, I just tell them, go, if we can find you a dealer where you can go and hang out at the cashier window on a Friday and just sit in a chair and just listen to the kind of conversations that people have, with the cashiers and collectors, whatever, because that'll give you a real flavor for what it means to be in the buy here, pay here business and what we have to work through on a day-to-day basis. So, and to that end, I would say when we hire collectors, given the choice between hiring a Mrs. Claus, a Mrs. Santa Claus versus hiring a bulldog, I'm going to choose Mrs. Claus and teach them all the things. And we're going to have them be friendly and helpful and work through stuff with customers. I'll take that over time. Now, again, if the portfolio grows, you might want to hire both. You might have a bulldog work in the back end of the portfolio, but I'm just saying, given the choice, I would hire, that friendly kind of jovial person who's really kind of trying to be on the customer side and work through whatever's going on. Because when we bring that sort of attitude to collections, then we're gonna help customers be successful. And then they just got to be tough enough, or somebody else has got to step in whenever the customers start to take advantage. Then we have to bring that to an end. But otherwise, we cooperate with them.
It's always good. I agree. I think it's always good to have both. I think it's always good that you let the Mrs. Claus run the bulk of your portfolio, but you've always got that bulldog, because sometimes the customer is just hearing a different voice. Right. That we called it second voicing, is like all of a sudden to them, the customer's like, oh, this has been taken to the next level. Maybe I need to do something. But I was never a fan of just picking cars up right away, unless communication had completely broke down, and it kind of gone on for quite a while. But
so it's sort of, when you think about the Mrs. Claus thing, it's really just trying to, if I'm in that position, I'm trying to be a collector, I'm just trying to be on the customer side, be a friend, help them solve a problem. Let's figure this out together. That's the approach we'd be bringing and recommending for collections for virtually all of our dealers.
How much can you pay today? Let's not let you get too far behind. What could you do? I think things like that are definitely important.
A big part of that is just kind of creativity and flexibility. It's a lot of times it's figuring out. I often say that unfortunately too many of our customers don't know how to solve their own problems. So sometimes it's up to us to kind of help them figure out what their options are and work through things and find solutions. So there's a fair amount of problem solving that happens, on the collection side. And so I think to really be successful long term, we got to be able to help customers figure out solutions and solve problems.
Agreed. So we've talked about quite a bit of things. I know the one last thing that we wanted to cover that the group had talked about and Amanda shared some information on is, with everything that's going on, obviously you got, 2020, COVID, car prices, everything's going up, which is, a topic for another day, car prices, but, tax credits, everything that's going on. What do you see? What would your prediction be for what is collections going to look like for the rest of 2021, with employment, unemployment, government money, coming to us? Is it going to stay strong? Or do you think that we need to start taking that proactive approach? And maybe, especially if I've got, the right size team or a manageably sized portfolio, do I start reaching out to everyone now, even if I've got a bunch of people on auto pay, and just say, hey, how you doing? What's going on? Because you could have 5% of your portfolio, you could have 20% of your portfolio right now paying you with somebody else's money and not know it.
Sure. That's right.
So what do you think what's the advice for 2021? What's collections going to look like for the rest of the year?
So my short answers on that would be, I'm always going to be on board with proactivity, right? I'm always going to be on board with being proactive and reaching out to customers, especially because even if I'm reaching out to a customer where there is no problem, everything's good, everything's rosy, their employment's as it's always been, it's still an opportunity for me to show some goodwill and good faith and just kind of reach out and say hello to a customer and just check in on them, make sure where we're at. So I would take advantage of that opportunity every chance I get. And it cements the relationship from the collector side anyway. But then beyond that, I would say, my answer when it comes to outlook for buy here, pay here, when you talk about sales or you talk about collections, my answer is kind of boring on that. It has been for years, just because I've been at this now for 23 years. We've seen cycles, in this industry during that time. And so my answer is always I expect buy here, pay here to stay the same. Like, I just think it's going to remain the same. Those of us who are doing financing for a deep paper customer down here financing, folks who are require an unconventional financing solution. My answer is it's pretty much going to stay the same for us, both on the sales and collection side, with the exception of employment. You mentioned that, because if you're in a smaller market and you got a large employer who makes up 60% of your portfolio, and then employer pulls back or lays off a bunch of people, now that can obviously hurt us in the buy here, pay here space. But short of that, I just frankly think it's going to stay the same. I don't look for any big changes. I think we just always monitor, keep tabs with our customers, be proactive, have conversation about what's going on with them. I think that we've got to watch as people are transitioning. We're all seeing how, service work, you've seen restaurants close because they can't hire enough people because people are making more money on unemployment. So I think that's going to be the thing as we transition people from unemployment, back to work. We just kind of got to monitor what's going on with the customer, keep in contact with them, and just. But I think most of our dealers are obviously going into this period in great shape with all the money that's coming in the market. They're as current as they've been, in a long time, and so I think they're in good shape going in. It's just communication.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think I look at times like this, or these, prolonged, tax time like environments where collections typically gets pretty good at tax time. We always had a big program where not only did we go after new sales with tax time and try to capture that down payment, but we also sent out letters and spent a significant amount of time giving people payment options to get caught up or to pay off. Right. And attack, tax dollars from a collection standpoint, not just sales. But
sure,
in times like this, when there's that money out there, I think it's important to remember that, the buy here, pay here business model is strong. Like you get, it's always going to be around if you do it right.
Sure.
Good economy, bad economy. There's always going to be a need for us. There's always going to be cars, and there's always going to be customers, right?
Right.
Yes, sometimes the car payments might be behind, but these people have families to provide for. They're going to work eventually. So I think when things are good, I look at it the same way as like, don't get cocky.
Yeah.
Don't think that all of a sudden your entire portfolio and your collectors all got 2.5% better, because they didn't.
Right.
Don't over adjust. But one of the mistakes that I think a lot of people make when things get good like this is because collections are good, they say, okay, well, let's grow the portfolio. And just like during tax time, if I wouldn't make a deal for somebody with $500 down, I shouldn't make it because they have $5,000, right? Like,
yeah, right.
It's either a deal or it's not. So
that's right.
The money is great.
Yeah.
Collections are great, but
sure.
You can't make decisions on your business based on what cycle you're in, right?
Right.
Know your car, know your customer base, know your store, and just stick to that person. And yeah, when subprime banks drop out, do we get our best customer back? Sure we do, but they stick out. That's easy. We would have always sold them a car, but I think a lot of people like, oh, I'm going to grow, but then they just bring in a bunch of people that 6 months ago they would have said no to, no matter how much money they had.
That's right.
And sometimes that's a mistake.
Yeah, and that kind of fits in the category for me. What I always say, and when we work with new clients, I ask them, always think about when a customer fails, whether it's just missed a payment, even it might be the first time they missed a payment, or when we end up in a repo situation, whatever. When a customer fails, I always ask my clients to think first about who messed up. Somebody messed up, and I think we always need to look at ourselves first. Like, did we overload the customer on deferred down payment? Did we set their payment too high based on their income? Did we put them in the wrong car? Let's look at ourselves first. What did we do to contribute to that situation? And we need to always try to be in a place where we know we didn't contribute to that. Then we can hold the customer accountable to, we know we did our part. Now it's up to you to do your part. And when we can draw that line and we can create that distinction and be able to recognize going in, and again, that comes right back to proactivity on the front end, like what you're talking about with underwriting and approvals. Let's don't, put the customer in a tough situation. And obviously we want them, if we want them to succeed, we can't, set them up to fail, as they say. So we just got to structure our deals really smart.
Yeah, I think so too. I think structuring the deals in a good way that makes sense for their budget. I think the car that we buy is important. That kind of is a great place to stop for today, because one of the things I want to talk about next time when we talk about, collections and I think, how our inventory and, deal structure relates to collections is definitely something, good to talk about, because again, if out here, pay here, there's guys doing it all kinds of different ways. And,
Right.
I remember when I first got in this business, we had $1,200, ACVs or TIVs, whatever you want to call it. And we swore we'd never go to $3,000, and
Yeah. Yeah.
lo and behold, you're at $3,000 and we swore we'd never go to 5. And next thing you know, you're at 5. And,
Yeah.
2 years ago, you knew if you let that happen, you were going to go out of business. Yet, 25 years later, here we are. And, and you've done everything right. And again, I think it's just, it's the business model, it's the practice, it's buy here, pay here as a whole will work. We've proven there's a lot of ways to do it. I'm sure you've seen more guys doing it differently than I have. And, so there's definitely opportunity no matter what. You just gotta, I think it's more how you run your business, and just knowing your model and not trying to necessarily duplicate the guy down the street. Just know what works and stick with it. So.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, that's a good place to wrap up. I think it's a good conversation. By the way, I want to share with you that we're starting a podcast. We'll be introducing our first episodes this summer, and I'd be thrilled to have you on. And I know Amanda's really shy, but I'm going to reach out to Amanda about being a guest with us too.
We'll get her on there.
Yeah, let's get her on there. But yeah, I think we look forward to it. It's just going to be specifically buy here, pay here, and we'll probably be releasing the first episodes in July. So I look forward to having you on, and we'll continue the conversation.
Sounds good, Jim. I'd be happy to attend.
Okay, great.
I look forward to it. I'll talk to you next week.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye.
All right, bye.